Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the 2022 National Art Education Association Women's Caucus Regional Artist Talk. My name is Julie Libersat and I am the Women's Caucus Exhibition Coordinator. It's my pleasure to introduce our artist this year, Carla Gannis. Carla Gannis is a transmedia artist based in Brooklyn, New York. She produces work that considers the uncanny complications between grounded and virtual reality, nature and artifice, science and science fiction in contemporary culture. Fascinated by digital semiotics, Gannis takes a horror vacui approach to her artistic practice, culling inspiration from networked communication, art, and feminist histories, emerging technologies, and speculative design. Gannis's work has appeared in exhibitions, screenings, and internet projects across the globe. Currently, she is industry professor at New York University in the Integrated Design and Media Program, Department of Technology, Culture, and Society. Join me in welcoming Carla. Hello. So I will stop sharing.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So good to see you. We're just going to go through the mechanics of sharing, and this should be set up. So let's try it. Oh, yes, it's all still in place. Wonderful. So wonderful to meet you all virtually, and I'm just going to launch in. I think we still have some people coming. Is it okay to go ahead and get started, though? Okay. All right. Hello, world. Hello, Zoom audience. Hello, Women's Caucus. I am so thrilled to be here today, and I would like to thank Julie Libersat and also Ann Holt, who first, introduced me to all of you and kind of got this started. So I'm very grateful and thankful for that. And I also want to thank all of the members of the Women's Caucus for inviting me here today. Now, approximately 40,800 years ago, Neanderthals decided to make their marks on the walls of a cave called El Castillo in northern Spain. And in 1974, which now also seems like the Stone Age, one of the first Hello World programs was written by Brian Kernighan. Whether to verify our own existence or to verify that our creations are operating properly, self-expression and communication has been an impulse within us for millennia. Since I'm just meeting most of you today, I'm going to share a little of my backstory first. The places from where I come as an artist, an educator, a technologist, a feminist, a human being, and a space alien, sometimes it feels like. I'm making efforts to not spend too long in these early places, but there are some key moments, some of them will be funny, in my life's trajectory that have led me to the place of my own in which I reside today. Now, it's always a good idea to Google your talk titles before you choose them, as I discovered in preparing this talk, after giving it a name, that A Place of One's Own is the title of a 1945 ghost drama taking place in a haunted house. Now, I fixed it. My cat and avatar, Carla Gannis, cross-platform avatar for Recursive Life Action Generative Adversarial Network, I'll get more to her later, are the guest stars now. And the setting for this talk is not a haunted house, nor a haunted room, nor even a room of one's own. The setting for this talk takes on a virtual locality, based figuratively on my art, research, and pedagogical practices, and literally on the context of how this talk is being delivered to you remotely today. Now, we'll start at the nearly beginning, a very good place to start, and no, not with an expletive, but with the F word, meaning feminism, a term with a history as polarizing as many an expletive. In 2000, I read the book Manifesta, Young Women, Feminism, and the Future by Jennifer Baumgardner and Amy Richards. They were two 30-year-olds, like myself in that first year of the new millennium, who took it upon themselves to define a new wave of feminism emerging, third wave, and to approach it from a copiously researched and lucidly written perspective. Now, this book hit me emotionally, psychically, like a tidal wave, one that I wanted to surf without trepidation. At the time, I found myself in conversations with female colleagues who were afraid to use the F word because it might hurt their careers. One quote by Amy Richards was particularly salient to me, given the resistance of some Gen X women to call themselves feminists. Quote, "The presence of feminism in our lives is taken for granted. For our generation, we scarcely notice we have it. It's like fluoride. It's simply in the water," end quote. And it was true. In 2000, there were successful female artists of my generation making statements, this one actually in the late 90s, 1998. Quote, "My mother was a communist, a feminist, a vegetarian, and everything," basically reducing her mother's activism to a list of hippie tropes. And then this artist declared, "I don't want to make work that screams," that, those tactics had been necessary during the feminist movement, which she spoke of in the past tense. And in some regards, honestly, at that time, maybe second wave feminism no longer resonated culturally with younger women. This is the 90s and early aughts, when I was a young woman. So this artist was happy to report she was having no troubles in her own career. Now, I wish I could have reported the same back then, but as a woman working with technology, there were obstacles that I faced that indicated chauvinism and misogyny were still alive and kicking. Basically, though, from the perspective of this young female artist, the road had been paved and there was no more work to be done. And I suppose to many women who had the privilege of college educations and better pay than their foremothers, like myself, I will add, this was not an absurd notion. Because I come from a small town in the South, and when I say the South, I'm talking about the southern part of the United States, where feminism wasn't always like fluoride in the water, I remember sensing, even as a child of the 70s and 80s, that equity and inclusion had not been achieved for women and for many, many other groups of people. That there were still many patriarchal dirt roads that needed feminist paving. My own mother came from an Appalachian family and grew up poor with no opportunities for college or advanced degrees, with no access to achieving status in the art world or academia. But that didn't stop her from dreaming and working for me to have more options, as her mother with an 8th grade education had done for her. In the context of where I lived, though, options for female success, particularly when you add in the politics of class, were somewhat convoluted. It is difficult to remember the teenage me with big puffy blonde hair on a stage at a beauty pageant telling the judges that I wanted to be an artist. Oh, but of course that I wanted to save the world as a teacher and be good and sweet too. And by the way, there is nothing wrong with these aspirations, but my delivery was canned. And I hated that teenage girl when I arrived for grad school at Boston University, and then later to the Big Apple itself, New York City. I killed beauty queen me off in journals and paintings, performances, and video works throughout the 90s as I dove deeper into feminist texts and histories. But a deep-seated anxiety stayed with me. I could never be a real feminist. I wasn't smart enough, philosophical enough, brave enough, high class enough, angry enough, articulate enough, degreed enough, active enough, self-aware enough to measure up to the historic women I idolized. When I read Manifesta in 2000, a book dedicated to my generation at the time, with its emergent girly culture, its expanded, more intersectional scope for feminism, I discovered I was enough, and that I had always been enough, and that now it was time for me to stop self-loathing and get to the business of defining what feminism meant for me on a personal level as a woman, as a human being, and as an artist. And of course, now, in returning to Manifesta, there are cringeworthy parts, as many texts from earlier in history can be. Groundwork is laid for us, but it always will be imperfect. I'm just going to dismiss a notification coming in. Don't we love technology? And so again, getting back to Manifesta, that it was, for some reason, all of a sudden my notifications decided to start coming in. All right, that it was cringeworthy, as many texts from earlier in history can be. So groundwork is laid for us, but it will always be imperfect. And we have to continue attending to it, recognizing the cracks in the pavement, repairing and mending it in new ways with younger, more diverse voices, adding to the chorus, and then writing the songs, composing the manifestos from their generational perspectives. 22 years into this century, intersectional feminism has expanded the scope and language of equality through its consideration of gender, sex, race, class, ethnicity, age, and ability, all as equal factors for discourse within a contemporary feminist practice. So even as we live in a world where we all find ourselves inflicted with PTSD, and I call that present traumatic stress disorder, the rising tide of feminism gives me hope. Now, one more anecdote about my childhood before I move on. At the dawn of the 21st century, I also reflected on and began to truly appreciate my mother's unique, if not peculiar, as things in the South can be, brand of feminism. Beginning when I was 14, she'd buy matching floral printed dresses for my grandmother, herself, and me to wear on our annual trip to the gynecologist to celebrate our female identity. And I will admit, I was not enthusiastic about these celebrations as a teenager. When we walked into the GYN's office, we made everyone smile, though. My 5-foot grandmother, Pansy May was her name, my 5'4" mother, Shirley, and 5'8" me, all in our matching attire, a stair step of generations proud to be attending to, together, our female health and well-being. Now, that photo from 1986 is terribly dated, and perhaps Southern Gothic as well. Oh my goddesses, we had such crazy big hair and shoulder pads. Still, it represents to me a paradigm of cross-generational success for feminism, meaning that when we come together across generational divides and support each other, unpack our differences, and recognize our common bonds, our strength in numbers truly can affect real change in society and culture. I like to show this one. This is an image, a composite of my mother and myself, composited for a 2007 project entitled Jezebel. Now, these 3 images represent work spanning 25 years of my practice, indicating that my arts practice has evolved over the years in reference to medium. Today, I use a range of technologies in the creation of my work. And then there are changing positionalities over the years. From a student to someone working in web design and doing retouch and digital compositing for a fashion photographer, to becoming a full-time educator. Although I first started teaching as an adjunct at the college level in 2005, and I remember juggling my teaching jobs at 3 different schools, along with freelance design work and my studio practice. This is a lifestyle some of you may be familiar with too. My art-making tools and my aesthetic approaches are highly variable, as you will see more of as I continue to share. But there are some through lines throughout this timeline where it shows I have had preoccupations with a vast array of human, earthly, and cosmological conditions. From examining reality and illusion through a variety of mediums, to studying art and technology to become visually, digitally, and conceptually literate, I have also focused my energies on finding role models throughout history that speak to some of my own core concerns: female agency, the construction of gender and power politics, class stratification within art and aesthetics, linear versus nonlinear paths of expression, and the importance of creative speculation in the shaping of our future. For example, L. Frank Baum, who is best known for his story, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, also came up with the idea of augmented reality in 1901 through one of his fictional works. Now, I began my art life as a painter in middle school, actually. Can one call themselves an artist at that early of an age? Well, I did. I also entertained other career choices. I wanted to be a stand-up comedian, but I can't remember the punchline to any jokes ever. I wanted to be an actor, but I can't remember my lines whenever I'm on stage. I get nervous. And a classical pianist. I practiced constantly, but I just didn't have talent, and it was good for, beauty pageants. So all that said, by age 14, I was pretty resolute that I was going to become a visual artist. And this is work, an oil painting, so, pigments applied on a substrate, that I produced in 1992. It was my first month living in the Northeast. And finding a way out of the South was a big deal to me back then. I'm the only person, to leave the region. So I'm obliquely referencing Diego Velázquez Las Meninas. I'm standing in a contrapposto pose, and I'm staring out at the viewer, daring them to challenge my agency as an artist. This was one of my early attempts at inserting myself into the canon of art history. You'll see in later slides, this is an ongoing preoccupation. And a loosely painted women's purse is on the table beside me, inconsequential compared to my canvas and my brushes. But then there's an exit sign that beckons in the background in case a viewer can't take this strong of a female presence. Now, hindsight is 20/20. This is how I interpret it now, 30 years later. After moving to New York in 1995, I began to work with emerging digital technologies. These are images of my avatar, Sister Gemini, who began development in 1998, first in written form and subsequently as an array of visual media experiences. These are all stills from Sister Gemini, staging a metaphorical web hack. By day back then, I was doing industry work, designing websites as Carl Boy. And what I mean by that is Carl Boy was Sister Gemini's twin brother in the story I had written, and a cog in the capitalist machine. But at night, I embodied my cyborg alter ego, Sister Gemini, making digital art through her that subverted certain corporate status quo thinking. And I was using the very same technologies that I was using during the day in my corporate work. And so here's a passage from Sister Gemini that I first wrote in 1998. And so when Carl Boy returns in the evening, I am just beginning my day, rounds of events where I perform like a tragical, ironical muse to the beat of a computerized synthesizer and under the blinking eye of a digital recording device fed live to any internet viewers interested in my reenactments. Appalachian folk songs haunt me. I don't remember why or when. A mournful ancestral voice plays over and over again in my head so that I feel my performances can't be that dissimilar to the speaking in tongues my grandfather performed. Like my grandfather, I don't really take credit for my performance voice, for it is a product of internal and external forces, much larger, more intricately complex than me. But grandfather knew who to attribute his voice to. His voice had a father. My voice is illegitimate and bastardized. Moreover, it is a hybrid voice manipulated by external digital sound devices. I cannot accept the purity of the ballads that the mystery avatar sings in my head. For what consequence is its unadulteratedness in this adulterated, syndicated, lacerated world? Artificial intelligence must be addressed. Who better to do it than a cyborg princess like me, suffering from partial amnesia? I imagine the huge virtual audience I'm performing for nightly. I am a shadow on the walls of their cave. I imagine the faces whose reflections superimpose me on their monitors, and I feel warm and secure in my own small cave as the camera's eye fixed on me and my band of digital instruments speeds me live through so many cables and phone lines and satellites to you and you and you. And again, remember the context. So this video is from 2000. So those were the technologies of the day. We'll just watch a little bit of it. So she first appears in code. And this is, again, me making a kind of surrealist or magic realist kind of video of her as a web hacker. And so then she breaks in through QuickTime videos to perform live on the internet. And this is a video. This wasn't a live performance. I wasn't actually hacking into anybody's, networks. And so there is Sister Gemini. The wonderful Julia Friedal provided lyrics for Sister Gemini. I am not a singer. So even though Sister Gemini didn't have many places to go back then on the internet, the metaverse, having been born on the pages of Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson less than a decade before. I produce videos, comic books, interactive web experiences using this technology called Flash, if anybody remembers that, and installation works to share her story. And I'm not going to stick in the past that much longer. It's like one more slide, all right? The image is a 2006 work using myself as the actor. It is entitled, I Dream of Jeannie Emerging from a Fresca Bottle. And here I'm incorporating digital photography and 2D computer compositing techniques. There's also a video sculpture that is part of this project as well. But here we just see the still image. Playing Jeannie, a reference to the hit sitcom I Dream of Jeannie that ran from 1965 until 1970, which is the year I was born, I set up a series of mixed metaphors. Here we find Jeannie on a yellow brick road, or should I say the yellow brick road, the American road of life paved in gold for anyone who works hard enough to achieve their dreams. Jeannie is not emerging from a 2,000-year-old priceless glass vase or bottle. No, our Jeannie, me as Jeannie, emerges from a Fresca bottle. It was the poor white trash diet drink of the South in the 70s. And I say poor white trash here because it is often used to describe the culture and family from which I come. So the woman who watched Barbara Eden, or the women who would watch her, and Barbara Eden was, as Jeannie, comically subverting the wishes of her master, they drank their Fresca to try to attain her figure. In the sky, paratroopers are descending upon occupied territory. We'd been in Afghanistan for 3 years at the time, and soot-covered butterflies fly into the sky, while flowers blossom behind Jeannie. In a hyper-mediated world of mashups and mixed metaphors, everything seems okay. Nothing is really okay, because nothing is what it seems. Now, skipping ahead, we're now in the 2020s. And here we see my avatar, Carla Gannis, who I mentioned before, cross-platform avatar for recursive live action generative adversarial network. I call her CDOT for short. She has her own Instagram. She actually has her own Zoom account as well. Anyway, so CDOT and myself have had 2 solo shows together so far. And CDOT emerged around 2017 when I was giving a talk and someone asked me the question about, well, what are you going to do as you age out of self-presentation in your work? And I created CDOT, but she has wrinkles and an imperfect figure, and she ages with me. Now, I have often used myself or an avatar of myself as an actor, so to speak, just to kind of differentiate it from pure self-portraiture, to explore larger issues in culture and society. But beginning in late 2013, now that's really kind of small, isn't it? Oh, I think it's going to go outside of the border. Okay, we'll have to watch it small. I took on a different kind of project in 2013. I began to emojify. And no, that word does not exist in the English lexicon as far as I know, but I use it. I began to emojify Hieronymus Bosch's The Garden of Earthly Delights. As much as aspects of culture and civilization have changed, primarily, oh, and by the way, you see it behind me too, it exists as a print work as well. So as much as aspects of culture and civilization have changed, primarily due to the various technologies we have created to assist and augment human experience, in regards to human emotion and desire, a lot has also remained the same. On one level, borrowing from the past, particularly from our creative past, from painting, film, literature, it allows me to illustrate this point. Our modern identities are an accumulation of persona that reoccur throughout history, where the human condition is represented in artistic renderings and sign systems, from the symbols in an illuminated manuscript to emoji. And they project forward and hearken back simultaneously. In this, I really love the term horror vacuic, it's Latin, fear of empty spaces. In this horror vacuic video that on the surface may seem purely a work of entertainment, I am touching on deeper issues. On the left in Paradise, Planes and boats descend from the sky, crashing down, and paradise is turned into an arid and barren landscape. In reference to the Anthropocene, in the middle panel, the Earth is depopulated of humans and animals. And on the right, in a nod to Robert Frost and how the world could end in ice, hell freezes over. The video loops like an animated GIF on the internet, and cycles of history repeat over and over again. One aspect of working with video, animation, and emerging technologies is that my work can be shown in contexts outside of brick and mortar gallery spaces. And so I was thrilled to get to take over the advertising screens of Times Square for a month, every night from 11:57 to midnight in August 2018, as part of the Midnight Moment program. And as thousands of people below took selfies of themselves in the square, I shared mannerist android avatars on the screens, and they also were taking selfies. They were inspired by Giuseppe Arcimboldo, a 16th century painter known for creating portraits of people made out of fruit, vegetables, flowers, and books. This project is also entitled the After Arcimboldo Project. Equally exciting was the commission to create another character, Lady Ava Interface, for the Whitney Museum's website, the Sunrise Sunset Project. And it was curated by Christiane Paul, adjunct curator of digital art at the Whitney. And my work took over the entire Whitney website, every page, from April 2018 to March 2019, for 1 minute at sunrise and 1 minute at sunset. And here you see Lady Ava Interface, and I'm referencing, who could I be referencing? Lady Ada Lovelace, 1815 to 1852, known as the first computer programmer. Now, Lady Ava Interface presents herself as an embodied artificial intelligent assistant, like all of the female identified ones we were very familiar with. They are now starting to develop and expand. But around 2018, it was, oh, some more people are coming, welcome. So every day, what Ava would do is provide visitors to the Whitney with a menu of quirky, non-utilitarian calls to action. One of them was like, water your plant with your tears. And then she conjures this miniature Whitney from her smartphone. She's also represented as an assortment of 3D modeled emojis, clouds, and cookies, symbols of internet culture. And remember when I told you I wanted to be a stand-up comedian? Well, there's Lucille Trackball. She is an AI stand-up comedian, speculatively, all right? And she represents the field of computational humor, again, as a speculative fiction work. The ultimate Turing test could be when a machine can understand the complex semantics of language and make us laugh laugh. Now, for purposes of time, I won't play her audio and her bit right here, but just so you know, Lucille rails against tech ageism. Her operating system is Cougar, and the server class. She wasn't a very good student. She was like a C++ student for any programmers out there. So the entire After Arcimboldo series offers an absurd proposition that the future of robots could be something entirely different from what we imagine them to be today. So here you see Lady Ava, as you've already been introduced to her, and I call her a machine learning assistant to cultural institutions. Victoria, the android archivist. We've got Lucille. And then Oliver, the cyborg influencer and politician, he took over Times Square, and Maura, a sex and comfort robot, and Tipu's tiger, indebted to the animatronic at the Victoria Albert Museum. It's an animatronic tiger commissioned by the Sultan Tipu, and it mauls a British colonizer. And Tipu's tiger, who's the electronic cat meme decolonizer. Although I highly doubt any engineers are going to take cues from me on what our robots are going to look like in the future, and making these outlandish and surreal characters, I'm staking the claim that the future doesn't have to look like this, all white and silicon. Part of a new Jim Code, as sociologist Ruha Benjamin adroitly points out in her book, Race After Technology, Abolitionist Tools for the New Jim Code. And, oh, this actually does have audio. I'm going to turn that down if I can. So here's a more recent version of the After Archimbaldo crew, I'll call them, and it includes my other avatar, Carla Gannis, C. So I get 7. The work is entitled Virtues and Vices, and it is a VR dream sketch. So I work a lot in VR, virtual reality, and this is a video documenting that. And it presents a convoluted spiritual text sanctum enacted by these 7 post-human avatars who represent different aspects of contemporary human identity. Now, many years ago, I traveled to the Scrovegni Chapel, a very old and small chapel in Padua, Italy. And in the 1300s, artist Giotto di Bondone painted the entire interior of this chapel with the most stunning frescoes, including 7 depictions of the virtues and then 7 depictions of the vices. Good and evil were quite clearly delineated in these paintings. Although Giotto is an interesting figure, and why he appeals to me on another level is he was coming about during a very hybrid moment as medieval philosophies centered on strict religious and spiritual ideology began to be challenged by a more human-centered view of life on the planet. Humanism was dawning, and the Renaissance was on the horizon. In the 21st century, however, as the world faces biological, environmental, political, and technological crises, humankind is at a new crossroads. An anthropogenic worldview has failed the planet, and notions of good and evil, truth and fiction exist in a state of socially mediated moral relativism. Posthumanism, a theory with at least 7 different definitions currently, is no longer a fringe concept. And there has even been an emergence of churches and religious sects who now worship AI as a deity. In Virtues and Vices, these 7 other intelligences, as I call them OI, and as you've seen, I've been working on them for several years. They appear as these altarpiece figures in this context. And it's an absurdist contemplation on the theater of contemporary life, post-life, and the beyond. Next, all right, here we go. Now, given that the title of my talk is A Place of One's Own, I'm now going to pivot into some of my very most recent work that includes volumetric scanning. So that's 3D scanning. I'm actually using a smartphone for a lot of it now. It's so much easier than it was years ago to scan in and make a 3D model of myself or of objects in space. And then it basically collects that data, and then you can open it up in a 3D modeling program and have a representation, a 3-dimensional representation of something from life. It's uncanny. So I also work with AI and social VR as virtual placemaking, back to the title of my talk, A Place of One's Own. And what has happened over the past 2 years, particularly, there has been an evolution in my practice where it has become more of a social arts practice. And this has happened through creating, of course, as I always do, but curating and participating in, and when I say social VR applications, applications that are virtual reality, but they are accessible via the internet. And you can view them, experience them, interact with them, either with or without a headset. And so I have been thinking about digital identity and representation and the locality of art and its viewership for a long, long time. And it has been a journey and not an insignificant struggle to find my place within my own arts practice and within the larger framework of the contemporary art world. And I'll just let this play out for a minute, and then I like this part, the fragments of a plane. I did get a few looks when I was doing the scan on the plane. And there we go. All right. A Place of One's Own begins in feminist practices. Here is a recent work entitled Object Body that I produced for an NFT exhibition curated by Katie Payton Hofstadter on First Dibs in September 2021. And I appreciate Katie's words about the exhibition. Quote, I selected artists who were probing their own fascination with technology and the metaverse and throwing a wrench into things. The work might appear to say one thing, but it's also looking in other directions. And then she quotes Mary Ruffley, the poet and essayist, quoting within a quote, it is not what a poem says with its mouth, it's what it does with its eyes. And so now continuing Katie's quote, to these artists, the metaverse isn't there to replace reality. It's there to probe it, to deepen it, and to create space for new questions. And so a place of one's own also asserts the absolute necessity for artists of all positionalities to be afforded space, local and remote, mental and physical, for their creative practices. Specific to the thoughts and ideas being shared throughout the Women's Caucus and the conference, a place of one's own represents contemplations on establishing a domain for oneself and others, specifically within the virtual body politic, where bodies, landscapes, architecture, and worlds become sites for discourse and evaluation of cultural tropes, social meaning, and the repositioning of identity in an increasingly mixed reality world. So in the fall of 2020, I co-curated the Archive to Come exhibition with Clark Buckner. It was an exhibition that took place in social VR. I built the construction you saw at the beginning, the big kind of teardrop. That was our gallery for the show. And so it was an exhibition in social VR, and in the physical gallery in San Francisco, but of course this is during the height of the COVID pandemic, so it was by appointment only. And also the videos played on a reel on the gallery's website. 57 international artists participated by submitting short time-based works that addressed questions of loss, memorialization, crisis, and reinvention through the lens of contemporary networked culture and digital media. And our writing about the show at the time, we began organizing the show and selecting artists and contacting artists in the summer of 2020. The current crisis we confront raised fundamental questions about what we value and want to preserve as we work to recover from their ravages and build for the future. How will we memorialize those whose lives have been lost? What could do justice to the fact that so many have died needlessly as a result of government inaction and political maneuvering, or worse, as victims of racist terror and state violence? How can we redress the unequal distribution of suffering and work to dismantle systems of oppression? What histories demand to be foregrounded, and what legacy should be left behind? What have we carried with us as we've withdrawn into isolation and emerged in protest? What are the sources of precariousness and resilience in our personal and collective constitutions? What kinds of work do we honor as essential? What do we need to preserve our sense of well-being? What novel modes, being and relating, have we developed to maintain our social connections? And finally, what do we hope for the future? So these are the questions of the archive, which both founds and sustains the authority of discourses, institutions, and practices. And we know the archive can be problematic and overdetermined. But the archive concerns the construction of memory, knowledge, experience, and power. And they present themselves now amidst these crises as both problems and possibilities. Revelations of the previously unconscious contradictions in our way of doing things, as well as opportunities to reorient our attunement to the world. In Pauline Mackenzie Aucoin's 2017 essay, Toward an Anthropological Understanding of Space and Place, she writes, quote, space is considered by anthropologists to be a central element of social life. One of the three dimensions of space-time culture within which human life is immersed, and that are at once universal and yet variously conceived and experienced by different cultures. Engaged with and experienced both as a physical and ambient dimension, as distance, location, or topography. Space is recognized as an important cultural medium, an idiom through which individuals can think, and that can be culturally organized to produce spatial practices that are social, aesthetic, political, religious, or economic. Once embedded with significance, spatial constituents can be made to carry meaning as part of a geosymbolic order. Place is a framed space that is meaningful to a person or group over time. And so the space becomes the place over time, a presence that comes into being through human experience, dreaming, perception, imaginings, and sensation, and within which a sense of being in the world can develop. And what I'm showing here, this was Superhighway 2020, organized by Miriam Arbus and Matthew Gant, and inspired by Namjoon Paik's 1984 Superhighway. And hundreds of artists, maybe I'm exaggerating, but close to hundreds of artists from around the world who've been working in social VR, particularly during the pandemic. We all came together, they constructed a map on the highway, and for 24 hours, we opened up our spaces and we traveled from space to space. Two of my spaces, the Wunderkammer, and also another space I built for a residency. I then invited artists, sound artists, to stage performances in. And it was such an amazing event, coming together, meeting people from around the world, being a bit sleep deprived, but reifying the need for these kind of connections and communications and place building. And this is another one, I'll quote another thing from Akam's essay. As sites take on cultural meaning, they come to be distinguished from generalized space as places. So more recently, anthropologists have come to account for societies where movement is the norm and culture is recognized in traveling and intermingling repertoires. Isn't that what we're seeing now? And it's mediated by technologies of translocality, computers, cell phones, satellites. And in a spatially fluid, increasingly global world, analyzed through multi-sided ethnography. Now, I'm getting back to one of my own works. This social VR work is entitled The Origins of the Universe Dimensioning. And I produced this work in 2021 as a translation of a 3D printed sculptural work that is actually on the invitation for this talk that I will show a little bit of as well. And I'm referencing both Gustave Courbet's Origin of the World and the contemporary fad of 3D printing sculptural holders for smartphones. Courbet's work was scandalous in the 19th century, anybody who's familiar with that painting. And even in the 21st century, it has been attributed to Facebook account suspensions when posted. But conversely, on certain sites, 3D printed smartphone holders of the sexualized female body proliferate. So those who identify as female still find themselves objectified, but we are finally living in an age where there has been an increased recognition of females' contributions to physics, engineering, computer science, and yes, of course, art. Thus, I have expanded Courbet's world to a universe positioned between a woman's legs, not to signify biological determinism, but to signify the power of the female archetype in scientific and cultural realms. And translating the work to the virtual space, the space in which it originally was conceived, I built a 3D model, right? But then I printed it out as a sculpture. But when I started to translate it into this social VR work, and it was for an exhibition, it inspired me to think of macro and micro levels, where the object can be entered as a monolithic and mythic body in sight. And of course, I have to say that this is an homage to Niki de Serfal's large-scale sculptural installation, Han, from 1966. And then when you enter, as you were just seeing before, the macro object, upon entering, you see the micro object that refers to the actual base reality sculpture, and it is at human avatar scale, should you be wearing a headset. And then this is the physical sculpture, and it was, again, derived from a 3D virtual file. It was 3D printed and then cast in copper. And I also commissioned Effie Reaper and John Sote of the Art and Design Collective Point in Passing to create a custom app that was scraping videos from YouTube that alluded to several different string references on origins of the universe. And I've mentioned the Wunderkammer project a little bit, but now I'm just going to dive in. I'm getting close to the end because I know we're supposed to go for about 40, 45 minutes. So this is the Wunderkammer. Wunderkammer, www Wunderkammer. I was inspired by the 16th century Wunderkammer, also called cabinets of curiosity, as well as the contemporary social media practice of creating archives and collections and cabinets of curiosity on sites like Pinterest, Instagram, and Tumblr. And through this project, I'm considering the uncanny complications, it's in my statement, of grounded reality and virtual reality. But while building virtual worlds founded upon decolonizing post-human and feminist archives. Now, the traditional wonder camera, I'll just play that again, as precursors to museums, most often took up entire rooms, usually produced by people who had the luxury to travel the world and build collections. And they were filled with art, antiques, natural specimens, scientific instruments, and collected from the far reaches of the globe. And they often combined, interestingly, like the internet itself, fact and fantasy. In my www plus Wonder Camera, I have collected and created remixes of physical objects and 3D virtual objects from across the global internet, representing topics that I have felt were of critical importance in the 21st century. Now, I have many, many different inspirations for this project, but one of the first inspirations for this project was actually Lady Margaret Cavendish. And she wrote The Blazing World in 1666, the first female fantasy and science fiction writer. And what a world builder she was. She's quite eccentric too, if you ever read a bio on her. Now, the slideshow, as I was just playing it, shows the physical and virtual installation of the Wonder Camera at Telematic Media Arts in San Francisco. We opened March 15th, 2020, the Ides of March, and within 3 days, we had to close the exhibition. But he kept it installed, and later in September, it reopened. So it's not a sad story. And then this is a physical print featured in the exhibition that reveals where the ideas for the Wonder Camera began. And this is C.Dot Studio. Her studio is way nicer than mine. But news headlines ominously project through the windows, as you see. And then this is my studio in Bushwick, Brooklyn. What is the word I'm looking for? I'm asserting that this is my, grounded reality studio, but I do have some AR in there too, all my friends. And again, my cat, Bashi. Also, much of the work took place in my ML, my machine learning studio, hosted by Playform.io. It is here where I train Playform on thousands of image data sets pertaining to the topics I chose to address in the Wonder Camera. And those topics include endangered species, emerging species, and climate change. And it's fascinating, there are a number of emerging species that have been discovered in the past 10 years who are already on the endangered species list. Then politics, networks, and digital semiotics, decolonization and global pluralism, humorous salve and feminist salvation, obsolete and emerging technologies, and sex and comfort in tech. The images generated by Playform, I then collaged and created patterns from to line every cabinet in the Wonder Camera project, both in virtual reality and in physical reality for the physical cabinets I made. This is an installation shot of the physical installation. That's a hand-painted holodeck. And I am referencing Star Trek Next Generation, if there are any fans, but I'm also representing a critically important book, Hamlet on the Holodeck, by Janet Murray, first published in 1997, and where she quite accurately forecasted the future of art in virtual domains. And then the floor is covered with a carpet, and that is actually referencing Lawnmower Man, a cheesy movie from the 90s, but an influential cult classic. And setting this holodeck up this way, I was trying to emphasize, it's painted on the wall, you've got a carpet, how the internet and virtuality is now something that is everyday to us, part of our daily lives, part of the fabric of our day-to-day domestic lives. Little did I know when I was making this pre-COVID-19 that this would become even truer for a large portion of us on the planet. Another installation shot, and all of these, so you see the virtues and vices again, and all of that was augmented reality, and they act as hosts to then take you into a VR portal. This is the Memento Mori ready-made sculpture I had, where you can take off the headset and put it on your own head. And then a few people got to experience the desktop single user experience. while the show was up, but it was very few. And due to that, I decided that this project meant something to me. And the idea that people couldn't share headsets anymore, we couldn't travel to galleries. And so I rebuilt the entire project in social VR. And it has different kind of technical concerns that I had to address. So I created for each cabinet, instead of the 900 objects that you could manipulate and kind of change the taxonomies in the desktop VR experience, I just created these dynamic videos to, again, challenge the assumption that any of these categories or taxonomies are fixed, right? And again, overdetermined. On the left is the cabinet of comedy as female salvation. I trained the AI on images of female identified comedians from every continent of the globe. On the right is the cabinet of decolonization and global pluralism. These videos don't last for long. The cabinet of emerging tech here, including references to Ruha Benjamin's Race After Technology and Nick Bostrom's Superintelligence. This is a GIF of the main chamber. So all of this, I could put the link in our chat today and you could all just meet me in there, by the way. It's totally public and accessible. And so that was something that was really, really important to me. There is a small library, and Victoria, the Android archivist and librarian, keeps all of this organized. And so the book titles so far include Doris Lessing, Ursula K. Le Guin, Octavia Butler, Toni Morrison, and Mary Shelley, to name a few. Now, since I first built the social VR application summer of 2020, I have continued to add rooms, but what became really crucial to the project was to launch a new phase. And that is including interconnected hubs where I build, to the specification of the scholar or expert, wonder chambers. And so I interview and reach out to various experts who are working in the fields that I first represented in my Wonder Camera, not as an expert. I'm not an expert on decolonization. I'm not an expert on climate change. And so I felt like it was crucial to start unpacking this further. So I represented in a visual way as a visual artist asking questions, but now I'm building Wonder Chambers for other people and for experts. Like here we see Regina Harsani, and this is her Wonder Chamber entitled, Is This Chamber Still Supported? She's a time-based media specialist. Another one, this is Regine Gilbert, actually a colleague of mine at NYU. She is the author of the book, Inclusive Design for a Digital World, Designing with Accessibility in Mind. And as a user experience designer, she's just tremendous and so knowledgeable. And so you see CDOT, each one of my avatars of the 7 in that Wonder Camera universe interview the various experts. And so Carla Gannis, CDOT, got to speak with Regine in her virtual Wonder Chamber. And Regine talked about her design practice, her focus on inclusion and accessibility, what she treasures in life, including sunflowers, subway maps, New York City, and the groundbreaking film Black Panther. Now, as I wrap up, and there's Regine again, as I wrap up this talk, I want to touch on my teaching life as well. At NYU, I teach at Tandon School of Engineering, in the Department of Technology, Culture, and Society, and in the program Integrated Design and Media. That is a mouthful. I run our XR, Extended Reality Lab there, where students have access to software and hardware for producing art and design projects that implement augmented reality, mixed reality, and virtual reality technologies. Students at IDM engage in deep research and take ethical approaches to working with emerging technologies. They make works that address accessibility, equity, and inclusion in digital art design and engineering. Here are some of my students presenting their VR works back in 2019. These are pre-pandemic era classroom photos. And to the right, this is a photo of us outside and inside of the metaverse. Now, educators face new challenges in developing pedagogies that address diverse cultures and support divergent thinking. We can still honor fundamental traditions of higher education without paying heed to rigid codifications that for far too long have engendered privilege to a limited sector of the world's population. In a digital culture where our access to the collective conscious is greater than ever before, an inspired educator recognizes that top-down approaches can lead to really inefficient and tone-deaf responses to the needs and ambitions of today's students. So listening to and collaborating with others, bringing their voices into the classroom really strengthens the role of art education in people today. And I have many visitors come to class each semester. This happens to be Leah Rowe and Indira Ardalik, two amazing artists and also creative technologists. And here they're presenting a work that they did with the Columbia Safe Lab in VR entitled Digital Arrest. Just some more pictures of the two of them presenting. They're geniuses. In many of my classes, and for example, the one I'm showing here, Remixing Reality, Social Dreaming in MR, I ask students to address pressing societal issues through thoughtful and imaginative implementations of emerging technologies. Digital tools can be so seductive. I'm a total nerd, and I'll just be like, oh, there's a new release, let me try it. But do I have something to say? So I ask my students when they are developing products or projects, and some of them actually, because it is an interdisciplinary program that spans kind of the gradient of art, design, and engineering. But I ask them if their projects, should they exist? And sometimes they're like, what? Of course, it seems like anything can exist now. We have so many technologies at our fingertips. But I think it's always important to ask, should it? Is it adding value and meaning to our lives as humans, as biological creatures on this planet? Art doesn't have to solve problems. It's generally not equipped for that. But at least it can be concerned with asking critical questions of culture and society. And of course, like all educators the world over, I have had to develop new strategies for teaching in the age of COVID. When visitors can no longer come in person to class, when many, if not all, classes have been held remotely for several semesters, when students who are just emerging into adulthood are dealing with mortality anxieties at an age that past generations like mine never had to face that young. In most of my classes, I have set up online spaces and places in social VR for my students. And throughout the course of the semester, actually, those spaces become places imbued and filled with their identities and positionalities and philosophies on living a creative and meaningful life in the digital age. I'll end with another quote from my 1998 story, Sister Gemini. Here she describes herself. I was a polyglot, polyglutton, a polyuniversalist. More was more for me. The monos generally co-opted the polys and transformed our work into something digestible, easily consumed, and puritanically strained. The work of us polys was decentralized. Its sources varied and pagan, rich on content, but poor on power. The monos knew how to turn our pulse into power, but in so doing, our multiple gods and goddesses were sacrificed. I wrote that over 2 decades ago, and a lot has changed, and some things haven't changed since then. But as Alice Walker said, quote, the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any, end quote. Artists, female identified artists, queer artists, artists of every race and creed who have historically been excluded from art and civic institutions, today have power, a more immense amount than we all may imagine. Through our world building, our space sharing, our place building, we can achieve what the late David Graeber, anthropologist and anarchist activist, pointed out to us all, quote, the ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it is something that we make and could just as easily make differently. Thank you, everybody. And I guess I should stop sharing now, right?
Thank you so much, Carla.
Have I stopped sharing, by the way? I don't know if I have. Oh, here we go. There we go.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so we have some time for questions. And my question was going to be to ask you how you've experienced the transition along with all of us to virtual life and virtual teaching. I think you addressed it very well, but I think, I've been surprised by things, like using as a technologist as well. And so I'm kind of interested in some of your strategies you already had developed and some of the ones are new to you.
Sure, because I can definitely expand upon that. I mean, I remember, in the mid 2000s, teaching class in Second Life. Before Second Life got a little dicey sometimes to take students into, and I remember, kind of trying to make sure we're all staying and teleporting to places that I kind of planned for our class, the class of that day, and so. I have been teaching off of websites since the beginning. I mean, since I started teaching digital art, in 2005, I always built my own websites. I just felt that was very important because we're a screen-based culture. And then as, social media became, and walled gardens too, became, more of an influence on all of us culturally, I started exploring other kinds of ways. I've taught classes subverting digital media. So where we would stage interventions in or on different social media platforms, and also in physical locations. So there were things that I was already, of course, starting to implement in terms of holding class online, sometimes holding classes in virtual spaces, for example, Second Life. But, and then when I started teaching virtual reality and augmented reality, of course, then we're starting to interact and frame things through our various devices. And so those were things that I was already doing, but we were still meeting, in base reality, in grounded reality together. And I have to say, it was really disconcerting, and more disconcerting than I expected it to be for me once I became, a half-bodied avatar on a 2D flat screen. And that's when I started actually implementing, social VR, because one, the entry level to build things in social VR isn't as steep as building things, like more kind of more robust VR systems and applications, desktop VR applications. And so with social VR, a lot of this is kind of plug and play. And so, the students could build these spaces and make them into places with me, and we could be embodied in different ways. And there were numerous ones that in various classes we tried out. Sometimes we just go in there and meditate. We'd have fun changing our avatar identity and, experimenting with the elasticity of those kind of spaces, and even discussing and talking about the differences between being on Zoom, for example, being in a social VR space, or being face-to-face in physical reality. And then now, for quite a few semesters, I was still teaching hybrid. So I was still showing up on campus, but normally I'd have like 2 or 3 students in class and the large majority on line. And so now we have returned to on campus, and I'm teaching primarily on campus, but still, you have to provide quite a bit of latitude for students because as I said, we're still living through present traumatic stress disorder, right? And so you have to provide that latitude and flexibility and empathy for students to meet on Zoom. And also, I'm teaching a class. Humor makes us better storytellers, building humor stories and game engines. I'm teaching that this semester, and I'm co-teaching it with a colleague and friend at UT Austin. And so we are meeting with our classes in person, and we have one camera, set up in the classroom so that everybody can see all the students, Austin student or Texas students and NYU students, or UT students and NYU students. And then, Julie and I have our faces there. And then we're doing lots of, in class exercises, but we've got we're starting to get the hang of it. The camera's rigged so that, everybody can see each other and engage. And then some people get in on breakout rooms. And students are starting to experiment with physical comedy, but also next week, we're all getting, my NYU students are getting volumetrically scanned. And so we've been going through kind of the history of comedy and humor, and particularly how that might be explored, more absurdity in visual arts, and then applying that to like rigging an avatar and what happens when you're in a virtual space, and how is comedy performed when it becomes interactive. So I've gone off on a tangent now. I just realized, sorry. I'm not even talking about,
I want to take that class though.
We're having so much fun though. Yeah. It's some wish fulfillment for me since I didn't get to be a stand-up comedian. So yeah.
We have some questions on the chat.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sure.
I will read it out loud. From Karen Kiefer Boyd, fascinating and exciting work and excellent presentation, one that I will bring attention to students I teach. You mentioned there are at least 7 different definitions of posthumanism. Could you elaborate on which theoretical perspectives of posthumanism you lean into with your work?
Oh, that is a great question. And when I was researching and building that piece, I have all of these things bookmarked. And now, of course, my mind is going blank, because I will say that I kind of touch on these issues of posthumanism and transhumanism in my work, obviously, with the avatar work that I produce. I mean, I had some of my books with me here. It starts with, zeros and ones, Sadie Plant. And I put books beside me today to give me strength as I talked. So it's starting with cyberfeminism and just, what was starting to be posited then. But, I still like with the blockchain and NFT space, and maybe it's just my nature. I'm not completely ambivalent, but I ask questions about these different philosophies in my work without prescribing, I think, to a particular philosophy as a belief system. I feel, even after 25 years of working with digital technologies and kind of now beginning to collaborate with my tools through working with AI, that I don't have the hubris to say I know or can prescribe to what our future holds or the trajectory that may be set for the singularity or post-humanism. I know I'm kind of skirting around that question. I apologize. But I will be more prepared in the future, maybe, with my bookmarks to talk more in depth on that. But it's just more questions I'm asking as I'm working and seeing these things, in various cultural contexts. Hope that was okay. Any other questions?
I'm very curious about how you might introduce NFT art, or how are you working with students in relationship to that? And then a little bit like you, a while back, I don't have my bookmarks, but a while back I read a really interesting article about the how much power and the resources and the unsustainability of that kind of art, the pull that it has on the environment. And so I don't know if maybe you could speak to maybe one or two of those things, the NFT, but then also issues with environmental concern.
For sure. That is such an excellent question. And I am not at the point right now, I have not incorporated, of course, these conversations are coming up in class, just part of the dialogue, because NFTs have become kind of ubiquitous. It seems like for anyone who's, kind of online for any, even small amount of time, right? I relatives of mine in the South, who just aren't part of kind of digital culture. Were one of them texted me the other day and they were like, what is this NFT thing? Why am I hearing about this all the time in relation to sports and celebrity? And so getting to your question, though, I'm not incorporating it into my pedagogy yet, although the chair of my department, we are talking about and strategizing, unpacking this by organizing a symposium to really present many different perspectives on a very polarizing topic. And I have to say, I mean, I've been participating. I brought speakers in, from further field, Mark Garrett and Ruth Catlow, to my classes in 2015 and 2016 to talk about blockchain. And I remember being at 7-on-7, Rhizome 7-on-7 in 2014 when the first NFT was minted. Somebody help me out. The vacuis, yeah. And so, these things have been present and I've been thinking about them, but I haven't mentioned an NFT until last year, and I started to participate more in curated events. Casey Rios has a Ferrophile project, and I was part of that. And then I participated in some Ethereum-based shows. And then I've been diving in more to Tezos spaces, because one thing, to answer your question, and I'm trying to get to a point here about the impact on the environment, there are two stakes of work, right? There's proof of stake and proof of work. And proof of work, which is is what the Ethereum-based system and the several other cryptocurrencies use, is incredibly deleterious for our environment. There's no way of getting around it. Tezos is proof of stake, and there can be some issues from what I've read. I don't have all my bookmarks pulled up again about some of there could be some unstable elements to it, but I have felt better, particularly because my Wonder Camera, I have a whole section based on, climate change and endangered species. I felt less like a hypocrite, to work with Tezos-based systems. But as an early adopter of tech, I've been an early adopter once I threw away my paintings and my paintbrushes back in the 90s. I felt like it was incumbent upon me to explore this domain. And one thing I've been trying to do is read quite a bit and think about ethical approaches, and some people that I can direct you to who know far more than me. One is Dr. Charlotte Kent. I don't think I shared her work. She's actually in my Wonder Cameras on another topic. She's also a scholar of the absurd. But she has been doing tremendous work. One, to platform women or female identified artists working in the NFT space, because there has been a dearth of recognition, at least in the early days, given to female identified artists in the space. And Charlotte Kent has been championing them and platforming them. But likewise, she just wrote an incredible article. You should be able to find it. It's in Wired magazine. And one of the artists she focuses on is Nancy Baker Cahill. And Nancy and I have been in several different NFT shows together. Nancy is an activist. She's based in LA. If you don't know her work, definitely look her up. She's just a phenomenal artist, and with a real sense of social justice and responsibility and taking accountability for these things. So if you read that article by Charlotte on Nancy's practice and several other digital artists and new media artists who were kind of working in the blockchain before the whole NFT explosion, and taking or considering more ethical approaches to energy consumption, I think it unpacks some things that might be really helpful. For example, Nancy is working, she did Art Basel Miami, right? And she created this giant mushroom cloud over the ocean, right? To just kind of indicate what's going on with energy consumption, but it was an NFT. But what she's doing is she's using and working on an Ethereum-based platform, but then reinvesting that Ethereum into technologies that are being developed right now to make Ethereum more sustainable. And I think that's really important. So again, it may be a critique from within. Maybe we are being hypocrites sometimes, but I think our participation is vital. What have we seen throughout tech history and digital art history? If, it's totally kind of controlled or operated by the computer engineer or the computer scientist. Of course, today a visual artist can be a computer scientist and an engineer, right? But if it's controlled only by one subset of a population, there is so much opportunity for exploitation, and bias, right? And so I think, being a somewhat early adopter is important because I can participate with other artists in critiquing these frameworks and thinking about new ways we can structure them and how they can be rebuilt. Did that kind of answer it?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay.
That was really great.
Okay.
And I will definitely be looking up some of the authors.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're at time. I have a huge list of notes I've taken. I'm going to get off.
I do too, and I do too. I do want to ask one more thing though. Are the Wondercomers for the people that you're building for specific scholars, the environmentalists and all of that, are those available to, for the public to access?
Yes, they are.
And where do we access them?
Thank you so much for asking this. I have been remiss. I wear many hats. My website, if anybody happened to go before this talk, my apologies, because it has not been updated in quite some time. That's one thing that I just have not been able to maintain. And I have just hired a grad assistant specifically to update my website so that these links are more accessible and easier to find. I've relied on events and social media a lot of times. And so actually, Julie, I can send you links if you want to share with everybody in the caucus to all of the different sites. There's a main kind of portal through which you go where you can link to everyone that I've built so far. Some of the interviews and the Wonder Chambers haven't been released yet because I am now putting this together for a solo exhibition at the Halsey Institute of Art and the University of Charleston at the beginning of 2023. And we're writing some grants to hopefully get a little bit more help. One thing I'm going to be doing is instantiating kind of the virtual reality aspect of it into physical reality again. And then we're building out this archive I'm creating, interviewing experts. So far accessible both as videos that you can watch on Vimeo or YouTube are Regine Gilbert's Leah Rowe, who talks about destigmatizing conversations about sex and tech, Charlotte Kent on The Absurd, and Regine Harsani. And then I'm interviewing Ahmed and working on their Wonder Chambers right now, Ahmed Ansari, who is another colleague of mine at NYU and also an expert on decolonization and design. And then Ahmed Elgamal on artificial intelligence. And so anyway, it's continuing to build. I will send links to Julie. I am not very good with succinct answers. I'll get you links.
Thank you so much.
I just added some links to the chat, so I hope that they're correct, I think.
Oh, yeah. This is great. Let's see. That is, that takes you to the exhibition, and this is the main gallery. Yeah, this is great from the main gallery. Thank you so much, Julie. And hopefully soon, working with this industrious grad student, I will have an updated website where it's easier to access this information. I really appreciate that, Julie. Yeah, great. And Anne, so good to see you again, everybody. Anne is the reason I'm here. We met at an art opening, a few months ago, and I'm really, really grateful. So, all right.
Thank you. That's a wonderful presentation.
Great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think we have one more event, and we're looking forward to that. So it's our award ceremony. And once again, I think Carla left already, but we still have some time, correct, Kevin?
Yes. So, be sure to come back at least in an hour for our last session today, which is the Women's Caucus Awards at 4:00 Central. And if you wish to stay, the breakout rooms will be open for everyone to visit with one another. But there'll also be short videos about contemporary women artists that will play in the main room during the intermission. So.
Bye, everyone. Fantastic. And thank you again.
Thank you, Carla, so much. And Kevin and I are actually in the Austin area. So we'd like to know more about what you're doing, your project here. But we'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
All right. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Good to see you.
Bye-bye.